I didn't say a word when the HOA president slammed her folder shut and accused me of damaging community property by laying down gravel on my own driveway. I just set a rolled-up set of stamped engineering plans on the table, the ones that carried my name and the Department of Defense seal, and let them sit there between us. I didn't need to explain what they were. Their lawyer leaned forward, squinted at the lines, and his face drained. He understood before she did. I wasn't some retiree tinkering with rocks in my yard. I was the man who had spent 20 years designing the kind of roads their SUVs drove on every day. And now I was about to turn that same precision against them. The irony was, I hadn't moved out here looking for a fight. If anything, I came for peace. After 2 decades bouncing around bases and projects overseas, I was done with the politics and the endless noise. I'd saved enough to finally buy a small house tucked near the edge of a subdivision that backed into open fields. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. The driveway sloped a little, the yard needed work, and the garage door still groaned like it had arthritis, but I loved it. I could sit on the porch with a cup of coffee and listen to nothing but wind. After years of dust, orders, and deadlines, I wanted to fix up the place, maybe plant a garden, and disappear into quiet routines. That was the plan. The trouble started in the pettiest way possible. Gravel. My driveway had been little more than dirt ruts carved out by the last owner, and when it rained, it turned into a mudslide. So I did what any sensible person would do. I ordered a few tons of gravel, had it delivered, and spent a weekend spreading it out with a rake until the ground was level and clean. I even tamped it down with a rented plate compactor. It looked good, and for the first time, my truck didn't sink halfway to the axles every time it rained. That Monday, I came home from work to find a neon notice taped to my garage door. Violation, unauthorized surface modification. It felt like a joke. They were fining me for fixing my own driveway, on property I paid for, with material that wasn't even covered in their rules. At least, not in any rules I'd been shown. At first, I tried to be reasonable. I sent an email to the board asking for clarification. No response. I attended the next meeting, sat quietly until my turn, and explained that the driveway was listed in my deed as private, not common property. The president barely looked at me before waving her hand and saying gravel wasn't aesthetic enough for the neighborhood. That's when I knew I wasn't dealing with logic. I followed up with a letter, citing the HOA's own covenants, which made no mention of driveways or approved surfaces. A week later, I received another fine. Then another. They doubled when I didn't pay. Eventually, I found a letter threatening a lien if I continued to ignore compliance orders. I stopped feeling surprised and started feeling something colder. I'd played nice. They wanted a war of paper, and I had more practice in that field than they could imagine. I didn't waste another word arguing with them. Instead, I went to the county recorder's office and pulled every plat, deed, and survey related to the subdivision. Then I went further, right into the state archives, where the original infrastructure filings for the development were still kept. It turned out the subdivision's roads had been built on an easement carved from agricultural land in the 1970s, a patchwork mess of poorly drafted agreements that technically left every driveway as private property. I spent nights piecing it together like a puzzle, highlighting language, cross-referencing maps. It wasn't glamorous, but it was familiar work. Back in the service, I'd spent years reviewing terrain schematics, identifying weak points, and drafting construction solutions under pressure. Compared to that, this was child's play. I documented everything, every notice, every letter, every date they harassed me. Meanwhile, the fines kept piling up, and neighbors began avoiding me. Some out of fear, some out of loyalty to the board. My family hated the tension. My wife worried about the lane threats. But I told her to be patient. By the time the next board meeting rolled around, I was ready. I walked in with a binder under my arm and a quiet smile. They expected me to plead, maybe to beg. Instead, I sat through their posturing until they circled around to me. That's when the president leaned forward and snapped that I was destroying the neighborhood's character with my gravel driveway. I didn't argue. I simply slid the engineering plans across the table. These weren't just maps, they were stamped with my credentials from years spent designing military-grade roadways across 2 continents. Underneath them, I placed copies of the county plats showing every driveway in the subdivision as private property. And beneath that, a letter from the county zoning office confirming that driveways were not, and never had been, under HOA jurisdiction. The silence in that room was worth every sleepless night. Their lawyer flipped through the papers, his face turning paler with each page. When he finally whispered to the president that she had no legal ground, I leaned back and let the weight of it sink in. After that meeting, everything shifted. The board dropped the fines without comment, though they never admitted fault. The lien threats evaporated. A few months later, the president resigned for personal reasons. The new board sent out a cheery newsletter about refocusing on community spirit, which was their way of pretending none of it had happened. My neighbors started nodding to me again, some even whispering thanks for standing up to the nonsense they'd all been too afraid to challenge. As for me, I went back to my gravel driveway and my quiet mornings. The only difference was the silence carried a new edge, respect, or maybe wariness. Either way, it was enough. Now, when I walk past the clubhouse, I still catch a few glares from the diehards who thought the board could do no wrong. I don't bother explaining myself. I don't need to. They all know what I did, and more importantly, they know I'll do it again if I have to. The gravel is still there, solid as ever, and so am I. Funny thing is, I never wanted a fight. But when they picked one, they forgot the most important rule: you don't lecture a man about roads when he's spent his life building them.